Okay, so today we are taking a look at an exercise program that's supposed to help you with hip pain. And this website is totally free and it claims that it is based on science and it's supposed to help you get rid of hip pain before or after surgery. And I wanted to go over it because somebody sent it to me. A woman who is dealing with a bunch of hip pain said her surgeon told her to look at this website. So I wanted to take a look, and when you see it, you're probably going to, well, you might be fooled initially. You might think, wow, with an attractive woman with a tattoo doing a plank, this must be a great program. When you see that it's been developed by orthopedic surgeons and physical therapists, you're going to think, wow, this must be really good. But I'm going to take you through it so you understand what you really get with this and what you can really expect with this, despite this very nice homepage picture. So we go in here and it says the HipFit 10 is a free science-based exercise program that helps people before and after hip procedures. So really important to focus on this word science-based. It's gonna be real interesting when we dive into that. And right away we get into the science. I'm gonna click on this in a second, okay? But let's first look at the background, our story. They say surgery is not always the cure-all that many patients hope it will be. After decades of working with hip ailments, we've learned that recovery also takes exercise and dedication to get the best possible results. So I agree with that. If you've watched some of my recent videos or you've been paying attention to the research on hip arthroscopy, you will also agree with this because you'll know that fewer than half of people who get hip arthroscopy to fix hip impingement symptoms are actually satisfied with the surgery. So here we've got this very intelligent doctor staring at an x-ray of a pelvis. Let's just learn more about the story. So from the waiting room to your living room, as doctors in the University of Toronto Orthopedic Sports Medicine Group, we've treated thousands of patients with a variety of hip conditions. Okay, so now we get a little background, and they're saying the best recoveries come to the patients who play a part in their care. They do the right exercises at the right time to achieve the right results. Okay, I agree with all that. And then today, after rounds of iterative refinement, HipFit 10 offers patients an optimal chance to heal without surgery, or to provide those who need surgery the best chance of recovery. Okay, so basically they talk about how this was born out of frustration. We could only do so much to help our patients, which means, if you're reading between the lines, they could do surgery, and if it didn't help, what could they do? Well, they needed to give them an exercise routine that they could do on their own and stick with. Something based on actual science. There's that part again, science. So we got to dive into the science of this routine. You're going to love it. So HipFit 10 is made up of the best exercises we have found to support the hip and ease recovery. So you're reading this and you're thinking, okay, well, there must be some good research behind this. Before we even look at the exercises, look into the science. The science of HipFit 10. Let's see. A proven routine with real results. Okay. Okay, so we've demonstrated that patients who complete a dedicated core strengthening program are more likely to achieve a pain-free life than those who focus on the wrong muscle groups. The reason for this is the ability to control pelvic tilt and avoid painful hip loading moments. We designed HipFit 10 with that in mind, to strengthen the muscles that lift the pelvis. So if you're confused right now, you should be. There are two things that confuse me right off the bat, one of which is, where is the leading published research? I would like to see that. I know this is the internet and it's really hard to use a hyperlink to show where your published research is, but come on, take the extra step and just link the published research. I'm not going to go digging for it with basically no information to figure out who the author of that research would be. I guess I could look up University of Toronto Orthopedics in PubMed and dig through a million different articles, or you could just link it right here. In any case, this is the extent of their scientific proof on this website, which, because they're doctors, we must take it at face value. So basically, you don't have to read all this, but basically they are saying Before they had somebody do 6 months of HipFit 10, they had them lie down and do an X-ray. I'm assuming they had them lie down because normally when you do an X-ray, from my experience, from what I've heard, when you do an X-ray of the pelvis, usually you're lying down face up. So if somebody's lying down on a table face up, they do the pelvic X-ray. This is what it looks like 6 months after continuously doing the exercise routine. Same person, this is what their pelvis looks like. And they explain down here that because the shape of this it's smaller, right? And this is bigger, it's telling you that the tilt of the pelvis has improved. Meaning, that big opening here, if the pelvis is anteriorly tilted, you get that big hole in the bottom of the pelvis in the view. And then if you posteriorly tilt the pelvis, that's what you see. So the hole is effectively smaller in this two-dimensional image, right? So before we do the the exercises in HipFit 10 and after, awesome. Now, of course, what they don't tell you is you could influence pelvic tilt when you're lying face up a lot of ways. And some easy ways would be to just put a pillow under somebody's knees and you would put them into more posterior pelvic tilt. So an X-ray, one single solitary X-ray, doesn't really prove anything. But what I found most interesting is just how they talked about what we saw earlier. They talk about strengthening the muscles that lift the pelvis. I know they're trying to be easy to understand, but I think most people don't understand what this means, because lifting the pelvis could be a lot of things. It's a relative thing, right? Like if you lift the pelvis, you could be, if you're lying on your side, you might lift your pelvis. If you just want to lift half of the pelvis, you might turn it and tilt it. And really what they're talking about is posterior and anterior tilt. So the HipFit 10 is supposed to posteriorly tilt the pelvis, not lift the pelvis. I don't know how they came up with that. In any case, they make the claim it's a medically proven way to overcome hip pain and return to normal. So let's take a look at this. Just pause for a second and think. What they're saying is hip pain is strongly correlated to anterior pelvic tilt, or the inability to get back to a more neutral tilt, which I think in some cases is certainly true. It's related to, but this is almost making the argument that it's really the biggest thing you need to pay attention to, which is crazy, because as you'll start to see here, if you only focus on this one component of the pelvic motion and of the hip joints, you're ignoring an insane number of other issues, which, is par for the course for cookie cutter physical therapy routines designed to help people with hip pain, especially when orthopedic surgeons are involved. They clearly do not know what they're doing when they're training people, which you'll see now that we are into the actual routine. Only 10 exercises. They take 45 seconds each to complete. This is good advice. Start slow, do your best, and progress when you're ready. Great advice. All you need are clothes, a mat, soft surface, and a timer. Let's go. All right. So you're going to do 4 to 5 times a week. And then you do one exercise, 45 seconds. Take as many rests as you need. And then you just go through. Oh man, I love this part. Here, foreshadowing the beginner modifications. There's going to be one for some of the exercises. And then if you can do an exercise for the full 45 seconds, 3 days in a row, apply the extra challenge. And then they say on off days, on your rest days, which is cool, try a stretching protocol that focuses on your hip flexors, quads, and hamstrings that keeps you out of positions that make your hip hurt, which is a really funny, interesting warning. All right, so, and if you find that stretching does not help you, use your off days for rest and recovery. So we'll circle back to that in a second. So here we go. The 10 most effective science-based exercises to relieve your hip pain and get you back into a more neutral pelvic tilt so that you have no more hip pain, because somehow that's going to do it. Number 1, seated pelvic tilts. Sit at the edge of a chair. Tighten your lower back and pelvic muscles to exaggerate the lumbar curvature of the lower back. For extra challenge, try it seated on an exercise ball. So just to be clear, they're arguing that the way to fix hip pain is to be able to get posterior pelvic tilt or more posterior pelvic tilt. So their first exercise is to teach you how to tighten your lower back so that you will exaggerate lumbar curvature and put yourself into anterior pelvic tilt. Good idea. Extra challenge. You do it on an exercise ball. That way, all the muscles along the side of your spine get a little bit better. Your abs get a little bit better at maintaining that position that they're saying is going to contribute to more hip pain. Perfect. Great. So moving on to exercise 2, straight leg raises. Line your back with your hands at your sides. Raise both feet 12 inches off the ground. Lower them back down without touching the ground. And repeat as many times as you can in 45 seconds. Rest as necessary. So a couple things that are fantastic here. Number one, they don't mention what you're supposed to do with your low back. Based on the picture here, you're going to have a curve in your lower back, which means you're not actually going to be learning how to keep your pelvis in posterior pelvic tilt, which is odd, but you will build strength in your lower abdominals doing this, assuming you can even do this, because most people will not be able to do this without some modification, because going with this long a lever arm, I know that's a leg, but a lever arm is an actual physics term. Like when this thing is that long, whatever's on the end of this lever is going to feel a whole lot heavier. So if you were to bend your knees, it's easier for your abs to handle the weight of your shortened leg. When you have your knees straight and your feet are way out here, that's going to make this a lot harder. If you're somebody who doesn't have a lot of training in your abdominals, even if you are somebody who has training in your abdominals, this is going to be hard. Okay, so it's hard to do this. This is not a good place to start people. It's kind of ridiculous to start people, but it's great they have a beginner modification that you can do at home by yourself. And the modification is have a friend hold the bottom of your heels and take off enough weight so you're able to do 3 repetitions without rest. Wait a minute, I can't do that on my own anymore. And also, what the heck is this? So that you're able to do 3 repetitions without rest? So you're going to go 45 seconds, do 3 repetitions. I guess you then rest and then do 3 repetitions again. And then how much should they be holding the bottom of my heels? So what I'm getting at is this is some of the most idiotic programming you could offer somebody when you're trying to give them a routine to do on their own to fix their hip pain. Your second exercise is, number 1, too hard for most people to do correctly, and number 2, the modification you've offered requires a second human being. And I forgot number 3, which should maybe go to number 1, is you didn't specify what you're supposed to be doing with the lower back. So great job. And then exercise 3, bridges. All right, line your back with your hip and knees bent, lift your hips, but keep your shoulders on the ground, lower yourself to the ground, then repeat for 45 seconds. I really like this part, but keep your shoulders on the ground, because there's a lot of people out there who have the strength to lift their hips and their shoulders off the ground. They're like, I mean, some of us can levitate, but also some of us can support our weight on our heads and necks. It would be painful, it would be tough, so I think this is important, but there's all kinds of other things missing here. So you can do these bridges, lower yourself to the ground, then repeat for 45 seconds. So I guess you just do them as fast as you... No, you do it slow, because they did say that up above, they did say you're supposed to do this slowly. So what's missing from this exercise is any sort of progression. There are no progressions beyond this beginner level. And also, they didn't tell you what to do with your abdominals or your lower back. Just lift your butt off the ground. And there's so many wrong ways to do this, and there's absolutely no progression, no weight, no single leg version, nothing. Then no elevation of your chest and shoulders, nothing. It's just do these for 45 seconds. And if you're going to have a progression for any exercise in this program, that would have been it. But they have no progression. So that's what science gives you. Exercise 4, flutter kicks. Lying on your back with your hands at your sides, lift your feet off the ground, alternate lifting your feet 12 inches in the air without letting either foot touch the ground. Complete for 45 seconds, rest as necessary. So does that sound familiar? Because it almost sounds like you're doing exercise 2 again, except this time you're moving your legs independent of one another, which is technically a different exercise, but the instructions are just as problematic as the ones from exercise 2. Except this time they at least have an extra challenge to strengthen your hip flexors and your lower abdominals. Hopefully you put on some ankle weights, which is a great idea if you're strong enough to do it. It's going to really build the front of your hips. It's going to reduce your ability to create hip extension because you're strengthening your hip flexors, which for a lot of people who have hip pain and are going to a hip surgeon, that's probably not the greatest idea unless they're super hyper flexible. But okay, sure, put on ankle weights if you're strong enough and can handle it. And of course, we need to have a beginner modification, and that is, seriously, have a friend hold the bottom of your heels and take off enough weight so you're able to do 3 repetitions without rest. So I've already commented on how idiotic it is to give a modification for a home exercise program that requires another person to hold your feet. Right, so exercise 5, supine leg lifts, lying on your back with your knees bent and feet slightly apart. Tighten your lower stomach and lift your pelvis off the ground slightly. Well, okay, this one actually is pretty good. Hold this position for 5 seconds, alternate as many times as possible in 45 seconds. Not bad, but I mean, I guess we could just say that's 9 because 45 divided by 5 is probably 9. But in any case, this is actually good. This is a progression from the bridge. So that makes some sense. And they actually told you to tighten your lower stomach, which that's great. That's I mean, it's better. It's better than what they've been doing in the rest of the program. Then exercise 6, side plank hip lifts. Lie on your side with your bottom elbow on the ground and your top hand on your top hip. Lift your bottom hip off the ground as many times as possible in 20 seconds. Switch sides and repeat for 20 more seconds. So here's what I know about the people who developed this program, just from this exercise alone. I already know that the people who made this program have not tried to have an older person do it, and they've not had somebody try to do this exercise program who had shoulder problems. Because if they had, they would know that they would need some easier version of this exercise, because there are a lot of people who can't do this, especially older people who have not done any sort of training. So my suspicion is the physical therapists, possibly even the surgeon involved, were all on the younger side. I would bet the PTs themselves are probably fairly fit. Maybe it was that, attractive Asian woman on the front, or one of these other people. I'm assuming these people are actually involved in the program, but I don't know. This could just be stock footage. Who knows? So what I do know is that they've never tested this with older people, because they would know that this is not a starting point for older people, and it's not a starting point for anyone who's had shoulder problems. So you would need some sort of regression, and they don't have it, but they do have a way to give you extra challenge, which is to hold a dumbbell weight in your top hand, which is in fact a great way to make this harder. But again, most people are not going to need that progression. They're going to need a regression to make it easier so that they can work up to this. Like maybe you could do this on your knees instead of having your legs straight and trying to leverage so much like that. Maybe you could do this on an incline, on a padded surface, on a bench or a couch, so you can start getting used to this position so your shoulders get used to it. But no, the science here at the University of Toronto, or wherever it is somewhere in Toronto, I remember that. Their science says you don't need that. So exercise 7, prone single leg lifts. This exercise is fantastic. It tells me pretty much where they've been looking for their science-based routine, and I'll explain that in a second, because this is clearly borrowed from another hip exercise routine that I've done a whole video on. So prone single leg lifts, you lie face down with your hips and back relaxed and one knee bent. Tighten the lower stomach, squeeze your buttock together and lift the leg 3 inches off the ground. Hold it for 5 seconds. Alternate sides as many times as possible in 45 seconds. So terrible exercise to assign to somebody who's got hip pain, I think, because it's so easy to screw this one up. Because most people, instead of using their butt to lift their leg up in this position, they're going to use their low back. Why? First of all, because they're just bad at feeling their glutes fire. Second of all, because being in this position, a lot of people's hip flexors and their quads are already too tight. And so as soon as you bend that knee and then try to lift the leg, the thigh up towards the ceiling, they're going to already be at the end of their range of motion, right? Like these muscles here are going to be so tight they can't get hip extension. So what's going to happen is the low back is going to extend. They're going to get a bigger lumbar curve to cheat the motion, which is why this is just moronic. So of course this has probably never been tested, or it's just sort of like, it's plausible, makes sense in an abstract world, let's just give it to people. Also, you notice there's like a big missing thing here. There's no progressions, because how would you progress this? Well, you could throw weight on them and then they're definitely going to do it wrong. Maybe throw a little weight behind the knee, they're definitely going to do it wrong. Like this exercise for a total beginner, I think is a not great idea unless somebody's right there with them, watching them, making sure they're feeling the butt muscles. Okay, so going to exercise 8, bird dog. I actually like the bird dog. It's generally a pretty good one. Their instructions are, of course, not so helpful, but, you know, good enough. Like, this is not a bad exercise. It will help you find your abs. I don't know about the head looking forward. It's okay, but probably having head in neutral, so you're looking down at the floor, in my opinion, would be a little bit better, but now we're splitting hairs. Then extra challenge, great. Touch your elbow and knee together when switching from side to side. That, again, makes me think the people who designed this are more on the young side and have not actually done this with normal people, because a lot of normal people who are really sedentary don't need the extra challenge. They need to learn the regression, and the regression is to not do 2 limbs at one time. It's to do 1 limb at a time, and then get more height with that limb, and then gradually progress to doing both limbs at the same time. But that's not talked about here because the science was just so good. Exercise 9, leg extensions. This is what I'm talking about. Okay, so like this would have been a good thing to give people before you get to the bird dog. So you're basically in that starting position and you learn to lift the leg before you do the other arm, the opposite arm. And that gives you at least a little bit of help, right? So this one, core tight, great. They finally cued that. Slowly straighten one leg behind you, contracting your butt. Hold 5 seconds and lower. Cool, that's great. Alternate sides as many times as possible in 45 seconds. Again, this can be 9 because math, but probably less than 9 because I guess if you're trying to rush through, you'll get more than 9, but if you're actually doing it mindfully, you're not going to get 9, you'll probably get like 4. Anyway, this exercise is pretty good, even though the person demonstrating it is doing it, well, the picture or the drawing doing it is doing it wrong, because arching in the low back, you really wanted to try to control that, but that's okay. Those instructions will not confuse anybody or lead to anybody getting more arch in their lower back. And finally, exercise 10, the forearm plank. So now you're going to go and do a plank with your body straight. Hold this for 45 seconds. Extra challenges, crunch your abs for 5 on, 5 off during the exercise. Cool. Again, this is probably a program designed by somebody who doesn't have experience working with older people, because if you start people with this, you'll quickly discover a lot of people can't start with this. There should be a regression here, especially if you're working with anyone who's older or very sedentary. This is woefully inadequate in terms of regression, since there's nothing. But we're not finished yet, because on your off days, you're supposed to also stretch, which I thought was awesome that they even included that, because there's another program out there that's supposed to help you that doesn't even talk about stretching. It actually tells people not to stretch. Kind of like, what did they say up here? If you, in the other program, they said you should basically not stretch, because if you stretch into positions, you're going to hurt yourself, damage yourself more. This one says if you find that stretching doesn't help you, basically just don't do it, right? Use your off days for rest and recovery, which is phenomenal advice, because they've clearly never helped anyone get more flexible. And they don't realize that most people are not going to stretch correctly, so they aren't going to get any benefits, and then you just told them to stop. Rather than learn how to stretch properly, you're just like, hey, just don't stretch, which is inevitably going to lead people to stop stretching, because let's look at their stretches. Hip flexor stretch. This is like basic level 1, feeble, not going to get you much result hip flexor stretch. So do that for a month and see nothing improve, and then you're going to say, well, I guess it doesn't help me. I'm not going to do that anymore. Hamstring stretch, there's, just to point out, there's no there's no instructions on any of these. There's just a picture. Okay, so what do you think is going on in this picture? If let's just say you don't know what hamstrings are, what do you suppose this stretch is doing? And where is this person supposed to feel it? If I were somebody with no knowledge of where the hamstrings were, I would look at this and say, okay, this arrow, so maybe I'm trying to feel a stretch here. I'm sit down and then get that stretch right there on my side in my low back. Great picture. So also it's phenomenal that the guy in the drawing is so stiff he can just get to the bottom of his shin and can't even show you a proper stretch. By the way, this is also not a great hamstring stretch. So you can do this for a month or 2 months and you'll probably see no progress. I've been there before. I did that as a kid. This is one of the stretches I remember they had us doing a lot in martial arts. And it was just like, I'm not getting any more flexible. As an older person, I'll just use loaded weighted stretching and then I get way more flexible way quicker. And this is just frustrating. So, all right. And then the quads. What do you suppose we're doing here? You just put on a leotard, push into the wall, bring your foot kind of towards your butt. I guess, oh, you only hold this for 30 seconds and repeat for 3 rounds. What is this? To keep from tightening up. Oh, right. So if you're doing these on your off days, it'll keep you from tightening up from all this strenuous exercise that you're doing. Which, let's see, you did a bunch of ab exercises. Like you did some ab exercises that were way too hard. No, there's no ab stretches. That's weird. And then, well, there's leg extensions, so that was glutes. There's this, which maybe you got your glutes, and then here you definitely got your glutes. Here you got your glutes a little bit, and then all the glutes. Oh, it's funny. There's no stretches for the glutes here, which I guess scientifically it was not necessary. So, okay, so let's return briefly to this exercise. This one, the reason I said they probably cribbed this from another exercise program is because it just looks a whole lot like something they were doing in the personalized hip therapy program, which, give me a second, I'm going to take a look at that. And let me pull that up. All right, so here we go. We've got the personalized hip therapy core exercises, which is from the UK Fashion Studying Hip Impingement. So it's not actually about fashion. It was the cute little name they had for an allegedly scientific trial that they ran on hip impingement surgery. So you can look this up later if you want. I'll try to remember to link it in the description box. But here you can see things are kind of familiar. And let me just hopefully make this a little easier for you to see. So we've got personalized hip therapy. And do you remember how the first exercise in this program was you're sitting there and doing pelvic tilts, and then extra challenge was to do it sitting on an exercise ball. First they just have you do it on a chair, which, you know, that's smart, but wait a minute. It's almost like that was the same thing. And then we go to number 2, abdominal exercise. So instead of doing this super easy, kind of ridiculously easy abdominal exercise where you're drawing your belly button in and then breathing, you're doing an ab exercise that nobody should be assigned as a first ab exercise. And then it's almost like they didn't copy this one, but then they did do this one, the stability exercise, which is basically doing the bridge. Yeah, okay. So they did the bridge, and they're like, wait a minute, what is this? Stability exercise T. Does this look familiar to you? It's almost like, oh, there it is. It's almost like the scientific exercises they used were from this program, except they cut out several. I know all of the exercises in this program. Oh, wait, number 10? That looks so familiar. That's exercise 9 over here. Now, I know they cut a few out. I've been through this whole PHT program, the personalized hip therapy program, and I did a whole video on this. I'll link to it down in the description box. You should watch that video, because this exercise program was also designed by orthopedic surgeons, and some input from physical therapists, and it's laughably bad. And I'll just highlight again my favorite part of this whole routine of PHT was the VMO exercise, which if you know anything about VMOs, they're knee muscles, right? They help you extend your knee. And this exercise does not do anything for your VMO. It's hilarious that it made it in there. So looking at this, you can see that basically what they're saying is their scientific exercise routine basically looks like a slightly modified version of the personalized hip therapy program. Except for this, I don't think the forearm plank was in there. I'm pretty sure it's not in here, which again just goes to tell me that whoever was modifying their program to be more effective was probably younger, because they're like, yeah, we should totally do side plank hip lifts and totally do forearm planks because those are really killer ab exercises, which they are good ab exercises when somebody is ready for them. But to have no regressions of any kind just tells me everything we need to know is that the people who designed this didn't actually test it with older people or anyone who's been sedentary. And more importantly, neither one of these programs, neither one, deals with all of the muscles of the hip. And what does that mean? Well, what I'm talking about is they're just doing your abs, your glutes, abs, glutes, side abs, glutes, side hip, a little bit of side hip. They don't touch your inner thigh muscles. They don't touch your hamstring strength. They don't touch hamstring flexibility. They don't even stretch properly your hip flexors, your quads. There's no stretching of the inner thighs. There's no stretching of the glutes. There's no strengthening of the glutes in a different position. There's nothing that deals with internal rotation or external rotation. There's nothing that deals with them in hip extension and hip flexion. There's nothing in here for abduction and adduction, which means they're literally ignoring almost all of the functions of your hip muscles. They are having your hip muscles do a tiny little bit amount of work for a couple different motions, but they're ignoring the overwhelming majority of the hip muscles and the functions that those muscles are supposed to support and facilitate. So you basically have a program that is worse than useless because it's promising that it's going to relieve hip pain with just core and glute strengthening. But at best, it can give you some stronger abs if you're at that kind of intermediate-ish level where you can even do some of these ab exercises. And if you're somebody who, not like this woman, but there are some women out there, well, it might be her. There's some women out there that I've seen, it's occasionally men, who are really flexible already, and just doing bridges doesn't do anything for their glute strength. They actually end up needing to load. They need to have dumbbells, they need to do this single leg, they need to have a barbell or something because they are just, their muscles are so loosey-goosey. They need to have something more to actually force them to tighten up, to contract, and to actually grow and build strength. That happens for men too, but I've seen it particularly with women who are super flexible, and until they really start to use weight, they don't feel like they're getting more stable and comfortable. So again, looking over all of this, I can't help but laugh and also feel really sad for people who are given this, hoping that it's going to help anything, because if you followed the crummy instructions that are here, you'll probably be pretty disappointed. You may end up with more back pain. You'll very likely not make a significant change to your hip pain. If you do, of course, get relief, that's great. That means you probably needed a lot more ab strength and a lot more butt strength, or you're like right on the cusp of having enough. But for, I would say, the majority of people who are sedentary, messed up, their glutes are gone, their abs are gone, their quads and their hip flexors are super tight, like this is just not going to do it. This is not enough to do it. I encourage you to look for other exercises, do other exercises. I will link to different hip exercise routines in the description box that are free on YouTube. I'm also going to link to another channel with Garrett G Money. He's got some great, detailed, very creative hip exercises that I think people should be exploring, especially if you're already kind of familiar with basic stuff. He's got some great stuff to kind of make you think about loaded stretching and think about leveraging things in a different, more effective way. I highly recommend his channel. You can also go to my website and check out my Healthy Hips program. I've got a comprehensive program. It's got follow-along workouts to help you with all the different motions that your hips need, and I update it regularly, adding exercises, adding new ideas to try to help people unlock different motions, because there's no way 10 exercises is going to work for every single person, especially when there are 10 crappy exercises. So just know your hip pain recovery requires you to learn a whole lot more about your own hips than what the really, really, really crappy pseudoscience in Toronto is putting out. I just find it so ironic that they say it's scientifically backed, when really what they did was they said, well, let's just look at what somebody else did. And then because it was published in a paper in a journal, that makes it scientific. But this, the PHT, you got to watch the video I did on that one, because it really details how they came up with this. And this thing is also, it's like a remarkable level of garbage. The way they came up with it and the way they developed it's just amazing. So make sure you watch that video, please. Anyway, if you want to check out my hips program, it's at uprighthealth.com/DIY. It's the Healthy Hips program, and it's money back guaranteed, because I know even my program won't be perfect. It'll just be a whole lot better than this, and it's got a whole lot better chance of helping you. If it doesn't help you, I want you to have your money back so that you can go find somebody, find a coach, find somebody who's going to be able to help you with your very specific issues. Now, in the meantime, I also encourage you to watch the video on the personalized hip therapy exercises. I'm going to link to it right here somewhere. Like, share, and subscribe. And if you want to help me raise money for the Wounded Warriors this holiday season, now to the end of 2024, hit the like button, because I will donate 1 cent to the Wounded Warriors Project. So thank you very much. Subscribe. And as always, I hope you remember, pain sucks, life shouldn't.